I thought as we approach this last Kant reading, we would look at the first paragraph, which, on a first look, it may not be clear at all what he's talking about. And even if it is, it may not appear at first glance to be important. But I think it is. I mean, sort of realizing what was in the background here in his mind, I think, to a certain degree, helped me in getting a hold on Kant's approach to morality. He says this in the beginning, with the view of attaining to this, and the this is the last line of the last reading, and the this is a truly categorical imperative, a categorical imperative as opposed to a hypothetical one. A categorical imperative would be unconditional. It would be a command that imposed upon us a certain duty that was undeniable, let's say, inescapable duty. That is, we were faced with a command, an imperative that we knew that we had an absolute obligation to obey. I mean, is there such a thing? That's really the great, I think, drama of Kant's moral philosophy, is that he passionately believes, really, that there is such a duty, but it's a very, very difficult thing to establish. With a view of attaining to this, it is of extreme importance to remember that we must not allow ourselves to think of deducing the reality of this principle, and this principle, again, would be a categorical imperative, from the particular attributes of human nature. Now, that is extremely interesting, I think, for us, because we've just read Aristotle. And if I'm not mistaken, Aristotle does base his moral philosophy on human nature. That is, we can sort of think of Aristotle's approach to morality as the greatest good for a particular creature, what makes a particular creature truly happy. And so he has to look at human nature to figure out what makes human beings happy. That is, human ethics will be based upon human nature, and Kant is totally rejecting that. For duty, he continues, is to be a practical, unconditional necessity of action. It must therefore hold for all rational beings to whom an imperative can apply at all, and for this reason only be also a law for all human wills. That was maybe the moment where I sort of clicked. It clicked for me what Kant was getting at. His morality is not a morality for human beings in particular. It is not a human morality. And the question we ask quite naturally is then what sort of morality is it for? I mean, who is it for? Because he's ruled out the idea that animals can be moral creatures. Well, it's a morality that must hold for any possible rational creature or any possible rational being. Whatever morality applies to us, it applies to us not because we're human, because we all have all the attributes of human beings, but because we have one of the attributes of human beings, rationality. So that if we can imagine non-human rational creatures, that is, I mean, it's possible. I mean, if we ever come into contact with aliens who had technology and were at a similar level, had culture and language. If we were to ever, and it's possible, we never have, but if we were ever to encounter an alien species that could think and speak and had a morality, then we would be faced with non-human persons. We would be faced with non-human rational creatures. And Kant's moral philosophy would apply to them as well. That is, Kant's moral philosophy is not derived from or applicable to any particular nature of any animal, like ourselves, Homo sapiens. It's something that's derived from pure reasons, he says, and therefore would be applicable to all imaginable rational creatures. He continues and says, on the contrary, whatever is deduced from the particular natural characteristics of humanity, from certain feelings and propensions, nay, even, if possible, from any particular tendency proper to human reason, as opposed to reason itself, and which need not necessarily hold for the will of every rational being, this may indeed supply us with a maxim, that is, a kind of a guideline for action, but not with a law. And that's what he's looking for. The categorical imperative must be like a law for us, where it applies to us with necessity, in the sense that it applies to us no matter what, and no matter its effects on our happiness. With a subjective principle on which we may have a propension and inclination to act, but not with an objective principle. And that's what he's looking for, an objective principle on which we should be enjoined to act, even though all our propensions, inclinations, and natural dispositions were opposed to it. In fact, the sublimity and intrinsic dignity of the command and duty are so much more evident, the less the subjective impulses favor it, and the more they oppose it. What he's saying is that the morality becomes more clear and obvious just when it makes us unhappy. The sublimity and intrinsic dignity of the command in duty are so much more evident, the less the subjective impulses favor it and the more they oppose it. Because then it becomes more clear what the thing is. And I think we've all had this experience, in the sense that we've all had the experience where we knew what the right thing to do was. And we also knew how difficult it would be to do it, because it would make us unhappy, and maybe it would make everyone around us unhappy too. These things happen to us very often in childhood, but in childhood, we're not really fully moral creatures. We haven't really attained that level. It's much more dramatic in our teenage years, at least it was in mine, where we are really at that point moral creatures. It's just that it's new to us and difficult to us. Think of those situations when perhaps you were a teenager, in which you're with your friends or your peers, and remembering peer pressure and just how strong that was. And everybody wanted to do something. And maybe you wanted to do it too, but you knew that it was wrong. That's the kind of situation I think that he's kind of thinking of. A situation in which you know what the right thing to do is. You know what your duty is. But everything is going against your duty in terms of how you feel, how the people around you feel. But you know that that doesn't change what the right thing is and what the wrong thing is. It's really how Kant thinks of morality. Is he's thinking of those situations in which we recognize, we have this intuition that the right thing to do is just the right thing to do, and no matter what the circumstances are, no matter how much in our actual particular situation, going against the right thing might make us happy, might make the people around us happy, might, in a certain sense, add to the happiness of the world, we still know that it's